6 out of the 7 installment series, Google Analytics for Agencies. I'm your host, Jesse Nichols, and today I'll be walking you through how to measure customer engagement through a robust implementation of Google Analytics. Today will be entirely around implementation. We won't be diving into the interface at all. If you were looking for interface training, you can see the series of short links for each of the earlier sessions. These are sequential in that they build off the skills of earlier sessions. So you may need to review some of the earlier sessions in order to get fully up to speed. But this session will round off with robust implementation planning. Into this, but before again, I just want to confirm if someone can ping in that you now see the second slide and everybody can hear my voice. Can I get at least one yes? Yes. The idea here is that we're going to talk about how to set up GA to measure the things that really matter, specifically the things that matter to you or to your clients. Although this is for agencies, this is relevant to just about anyone who uses the product. Now, what does it mean to say to set up GA for the things that really matter? That doesn't necessarily mean that your standard implementation of GA won't capture the things that really matter to you, but that it's not guaranteed or it's not necessary. And the way that this is done, the way that you set up GA to measure the things that really matter is through very careful planning. Google is not just a web measurement tool to figure out, is your website up and performing like you thought it would. It's not just a media tool to understand, is your media performing in the way that you thought it was, or is there any way to optimize that? It's both of those things and many, many more. Analytics is a business analytics tool capable of helping make better decisions across an organization of any size and just about any complexity, any of them that have at least some online presence. And because it is a business analytics tool and one that can provide a variety of value to different people in different roles, it's very important to consider the business uses that will go that this tool will provide before you consider implementation complete. So I know if you are starting with an existing implementation, it doesn't mean that you can't use this guidance, which theoretically is for new implementations. It doesn't mean you can't use this guidance to audit existing implementations and augment or improve them. And again, the idea here is that with this planning process that can be very time-consuming, you will have data that will produce insights that weren't available before, but can provide a tremendous amount of value to a client afterward. Dive in and identify first the steps involved in this implementation planning, this general concept that I'm going to lay out. So this slide is just a little bit busy, but we're going to break this down step by step. And the idea here is that everything that I'm going to be discussing is addressing a specific need that the customer has. As an agency or as a business in general, although you may have condensed some of these steps, you certainly have probably have named them something else. Each of these steps in some sense should happen in order for a robust implementation to have gone according to plan, to make sure that all the data is coming in as you would expect, so that when it comes to do analysis, everything is ready. And I'm the first to admit that these sorts of plans are checked by reality. Right? Customers are not always entirely willing to make all of your requests go live. Things can take time. Things can be a bit messed up. And by speaking to the highest ideals of this planning process, I think everyone will benefit by just better understanding what part of the process, what part of the planning cycle they might be in. Discussing are, how to determine business goals and key performance indicators for your client. How to really scope out what it is they need this analytics for, what they're going to do with it, and then we identified all of these different levels of needs, both the highest and the most granular. How to pick apart a site and really look at it through the eyes of a future web analyst, translate the features of the website you want to measure to the features of the product, the Google Analytics that we allow you to enable measurement with, and up the account once all of the tracking is in place, and deliver these implementation recommendations either to your client or to another webmaster or even to another internal team if you do the development yourself. And some guide on how to do some assurance. And we're gonna wrap all of this up with some specific examples of how to use the various advanced features within Google Analytics. And I'm also even going to do a sample implementation guide. This is something that I've worked on personally with another Googler here, and we think is a pretty good representation of something that can be used to deliver implementation recommendations to clients any size on implementations of almost any scope. It's very easy to scale out, and you'll have access to all of these documents, the presentation and the sample implementation guide after this webinar. Again, without further ado, let's talk about each of these steps represent. Step in any of this process seems obvious, but I think that there are multiple levels or multiple layers of depth to which you can go into determining the business goals and KPIs in relationship to a website. What we're doing here is not determining necessarily just the business goals of your marketing campaign. The job of a robust implementation, and it's the job of each agency to determine how far they want to go in this. The robust web analytics implementation should reflect the just general business goals of the client that you're working with, right? And how that translates to the web. And the question, why does your website exist? What does it intend to do? And very rarely is there a simple answer to this. Very rarely is there just, well, to increase purchases. Well, that would be one of the many business goals that you have, but there are a variety of business goals of the website, and then on top of that, there are a variety of whether or not that goal can take place. So some example business goals, of course, things like conversions, transactions, leads, or some sort of sign-up form. Usually a help center. Right? There's a help center, then one of the implicit goals of a website is to help customers with support issues. It is a investments or recruitment form, right? These might be very tertiary or secondary goals to the overall goal of the website of more revenue, but they're certainly goals. All these goals that again that unfold out of that, such as customer education, press releases, adoption, or at least product adoption, insofar as people are interested in new products that you're rolling out and posting on your website. Right? There's a number of different reasons that the website exists that fall into line behind the ultimate goal of business revenue. But it's important to recognize all of these because at some point in the future, if not immediately, these will start to pick up on the fact that there is a trove of data that will help them do their job of web analytics, and it's your job to prepare the web analytics account so that comes they'll be able to find what they need to know and know how many customers are using the website and reflects their individual goals. So you do this by meeting with various business groups and determining, well, what do they need the website to do for them? What do they need to know that the website is doing or not doing in order to gauge their own success? Out, and you lay out all of the things that influence the success in that process, right? So if you're going to be determining key performance indicators and you're going to have some sort of conversion rate for that, it's important to know, well, for everybody who didn't convert, what were they doing? Because at some point, something influenced them to either get close to the point of conversion or it completely deviates from their conversion process. So it's important to identify what helps or hurts this experience along the way to that conversion so that you can better analyze and optimize those features. Setting out the business goals and KPIs, a very familiar step in this process, but important to really think beyond the scope of the work that you as an agency is doing and holistically about how the business could potentially use this again, web data later on. And at this point as well, to start to talk about what project complete looks like. Right? Since we're talking about the implementation, it's very important to say, well, this implementation has the following steps, and it will be, we're expecting these steps to take X amount of time, and these are the stakeholders. These are who are responsible for what. So, if your implementation, as you'll see in the implementation guide, should have a bit of a project plan feel. This is a project. Implementations have a definite end, or at least the phases have an end, at which point you kind of take stock of what you've done and you make sure everything's coming in. If there are later steps to this implementation, you kind of move forward with those once the first step is completed. So business goals and KPIs. This also is your own goal of figuring out, when is this project considered complete. Again, many agencies tend to combine. Not a problem. Again, this is up to you as to how you configure this. But part of a robust implementation is just thinking through what are the types of analysis that will be done in order to indicate whether or not the KPIs are being hit. Right? Analysis may be just the generation of a report, but there may be some types or certain configurations of this report or certain look and feel of this report that would influence the way that you set up the tags or the data that is coming through your account. So it's a helpful exercise to while you're talking or after you're talking to these stakeholders, understanding, well, what types of report are you going to need right off the bat? We'll never be able to predict all the reports that you'll need. If you're going to have to produce some custom dashboard or custom integrations of data, if there are certain depths that will be performing analysis, it will be helpful to know because it could influence the way you construct the tags that will produce the data in the end. Because this is often the point where clients don't even know what they could track. It's your job as an expert to educate them on what metrics are more meaningful, maybe more meaningful than others, and if they're clueless on what metrics should be important to their business, and they may be using very unsophisticated metrics. This is the point at which you'll say, well, I think that these metrics could provide better insight to indicate whether or not your goals are being completed, and if they aren't, what we can do about it. This is also the point where you'll do as much prep work as possible, right? If you think that the web might provide technical hurdles, or if there are certain platforms the website's built on, you'll need to work around these at implementation time. This is the point when you start talking with IT and understand, or the web developers, and how you'll be able to get tags on the page and how effective that process is going to be. This is time to take stock of where all of the traffic sources are going to be coming from, right? So if part of implementation is get tags on the site, the other part of implementation is making sure that the traffic that comes in is also tagged, and we covered this extensively in the Measuring All Media webinar a few months ago. Again, this is just kind of taking stock of all the variables, trying to put as much on the table as possible so that when it comes time to actually start applying tags, you've got the best chance at smoothly. Again, there are going to be road speed bumps, but this is a great time to try to eliminate some of those early, or at least identify them. Once you've kind of covered the gamut of what you need to cover with the client, it's time to go back and do the nuts and bolts work that just has to be done for an implementation. This is in contrast to assuming that there are a couple of clear conversions for a website, kind of identifying those and just slapping the GA code on the page to get something started, which is a fine strategy if you need to launch and iterate something, a website or a microsite very quickly. Just get the GA code on the page, get things rolling. But if you want things done, in a way that, again, reflects the true and overall value of web analytics to a business, then it's important to break the website that you're going to be analyzing or tracking, and really try to understand, like, what are all of the trackable elements here, right? So, I mean, when you're analyzing the site, like, are there any redirects, or are there any dynamic pages on static URLs that need to be tracked? But this is, just looking at the web page as a series of actions that can be taken, or the website is a series of actions that can be taken, right? Granted that all of the web pages will be tracked. That's the nature of web analytics. It'll get all the pages. But all of this modern experiences that truly represent engagement or show that the customer has done something that you or the web developer thought was valuable, right? So these are dynamic forms. These are flash elements. These are buttons that encourage or hamper user experience, or that drive the actual functionality of the entire site, like adding to cart or a really important design function. Things that GA doesn't track automatically, like downloads or important outbound links. These could be things that that again, something inherently valuable because someone paid for it to be developed at some point, right? Interactive content, games, and such that that won't come through the standard tracking tags, and identifying these as individual elements through a long list or a grid or what have you, however you're going to do it, is critical to setting yourself up to knowing what tags you're going to apply and where. Includes the kind of customized data that you're going to be importing into Google Analytics. So there's some examples of useful data here, like a visitor type, are they a member or a non-member? Are they a new or returning purchaser? Have you collected demographic information at some point that you could insert in there? All of this is this is the point when you'll take stock of that, and also this is when you'll kind of round out the Google Analytics experience with things like e-commerce tracking. You identify is that do you need e-commerce tracking? What platform are they using? Do you need to track site search, and what platform are they using there? What does that look like? So this is the process of breaking down the entire website and all of its constituent functions. And this should also reflect the measurement needs that you just identified, right? If you've got important business goals and KPIs, you should make sure that all of those are covered in your site analysis. That you decide what about the site indicates that the business goal was completed or on its way to completion. If certain measurement needs and reporting needs, that is reflected and captured in this process as well. And the point here is to be almost overly exhaustive, because you can always kind of cut back later. Things that either will need to be explicitly tagged or will be inherent or implicitly tagged already by using GA. And here are some more examples of what you can measure. Just right. So if you didn't know any of some of these things could be measured, this is kind of time to take stock of what on a website is even available for GA. And this is not a completely exhaustive list. The list goes on and will continue to evolve as the web evolves. But think of content categories or product categories if you're an e-commerce site. Sort of tag that you have on a website, right? We'll talk about what features you'll use to enable this, but these are on the table. Search, outbound links and downloads, and mail to links, those are pretty familiar. But if there are key buttons or key actions on the site that are taken with a button, it's important not just to know that someone it's important not just to know that someone had a transaction with X number of things in a cart, which you would get with e-commerce tracking. But got the ability, which you do with GA, to track when people are adding or removing things to carts, how often it happens within a session, how many people are doing things but not purchasing. That kind of data only comes if you've taken the time to plan out the tags that'll need to go on the page, and you kind of go through and really just kind of tick things off. Do they have social sharing functions? Are there interactive elements? Is there any metadata about the experience that I should be collecting? Not entirely sure exactly which this initially. It's important to again list this out in your site scoping, and that can take whatever format you as an agency decide on. But this level of consistency where you're dealing about collecting all your business goals, you're collecting the reporting needs, and then you come back to your desk and you just bang sitemap and all the elements inside of it. This kind of consistency will produce or will help you produce world-class implementations over and over again. The elements, you'll start translating features. Now, to send this deck out, or at least a link to it, this presentation, but it's important to at least conceptually visualize where this implementation is going and what the arc looks like, right? You get needs, you identify what will measure those needs, now to identify what tags will reach those measurement goals, right? So this is having a great end over the tags available within GA. Unfortunately, due to the nature of the simplicity of the tag structure, we try to make this as easy and flexible as possible, right? We only have a handful of tags that are available, but you go through and map all those site elements to the specific GA feature used to collect that metric. You'll see more robust examples of this once we get into the actual implementation guide. again, as an agency, it is a recommended that you go forward with actually configuring the account, or at least laying out very explicitly what the account configuration should look like. And this is going so far not only to make all of the standard profiles, but apply the features and goals with funnels as needed. Make sure that the access controls are in line, who has access to what profile and what level. Make sure that all linkings with other Google products are done, and even going so far as to preparing customer reports or advanced segments for your client, knowing what your measurement and analysis and reporting needs are. And the delivery of these, it's recommended, or at least I personally recommend having some sort of templated implementation guide into which you can put these recommendations to deliver to an IT team or a webmaster or web developer, because all of this great work, it can be very hard to communicate in sound bites, right, or in small emails. If you've got a single place that really goes through the description of everything that's going to happen for the implementation for you to get to this kind of point of implementation complete. To put this into an implementation guide, structures your thinking, it structures the webmaster's thinking, it reaches that level of exhaustiveness that ensures that this is going to come through as close as possible to your original vision, and it would be somewhat friendly, right? This is as opposed to just dumping on someone. This is you should take the time to explain how to reach the measurement goals, or give just a sentence or a bullet point of context as to why you're asking them to do this work and what kind of value it might provide in the end. However, not just be conceptual. This should actually provide those code snippets at some point, because the gears can be in place, but without your expert guidance on what features should be used and how those features and tags should be constructed, you're leaving your implementation to chance. So the more planning you put into this, the risk of there being a breakdown in communication, which the implementation guide is designed to mitigate. There's also a chance to describe these potential hurdles that they might encounter, and again, try to make this process go a little bit easier for the person who's actually placing code on page. I think there are misconceptions out there of how far you can go or how far you shouldn't go for an implementation guide, as far as web developers do their own work, or they'll figure out their response. They may be able to get the tags on the page in working order, but identifying which tag that they need to use to identify the naming structure of the data within that tag, leaving that to chance means that you are removing the analysis. You're removing the data from the analysis. All of a sudden, there is an analyst who has certain analysis needs, and then there is a webmaster or IT person who has their own vision for what these tags should probably do. And disconnect could lead to confusion. It could lead to data that's analyze or impossible to analyze, or just missing data. And this is your opportunity to try to make this go as best as possible within the reason. A robust implementation, one should help with QA, right? So this could be something like working on their staging or development server to test the features. These could be something as simple as just manipulating the things that should fire off these features and then checking the reports and afterwards. But it's very helpful, especially if you do have a project plan set up, simply go through and knock out a few of these features that you've recommended implementing, make firing as normal, and give some sense of whether or not they're completed. And again, this completion of this process is a way that the vision for web analytics, which is like a robust business analysis tool, gets executed as one is planned, right? So if any of these steps is missing or weak, it's hard to have an ability for the implementation process. And I want to wrap all of this in context. Probably might have been better to give this at the very beginning, but I want all this in context that it's not within the purview of every agency to go, right? This is, in my mind, what any agency who claims to be able to do a web analytics implementation, this is, in my mind, what should be in some form able to offer. If you're going to provide a little bit of guidance, that's great. We will increase adoption of analytics even at a very, very low level. get the good word out there and get people interested in what they could get. But if you're going to be marketing yourself as an agency who can perform a web analytics implementation, these are the links. I personally, at least, believe this is not necessarily some sort of Google-sponsored recommendation. These are the links that I think that should go. And the context on this is, as the Google Analytics Certified Partner Program Manager, our product requires a bit of mess and a bit of kind of hand-holding to meet customers' needs. Right? Our product is a platform, not necessarily an completely robust product, right? Our product is a platform for someone or an expert to customize to meet analysis needs, and it's this process or the steps that we've identified will help you get there. Now, if you're not an agency who wants to do this kind of work, who has the technical resources to put these configurations together, it's not a problem, right? This is not like that every agency must do, every marketing agency or web development or creative agency must do this. It's fine, but just acknowledge what these steps would be, right? So if you're working with a pre-existing analytics account and you need data that doesn't exist in there already, like you need to know when people are adding or moving things to cart and be in there, it's at least important to acknowledge this process and consult with the client on getting through this at some point or another, and making sure that their planning reflects your analysis needs as well as their analysis needs. And again, acknowledging that this can be kind of a tough process, right? That the barrier to entry is very low for GA. The barrier to something or something approaching perfection in web analytics implementations, which is a dream in itself, probably unattainable. It takes business planning. It can take many weeks and dozens of hours of implementation, kind of design and guidance, and then QA, right? So QA is easy. GA is free. Do really well or do web analytics really well and do it in a very interesting level is easy. It can be very difficult at times. And it's not free, right? It takes development hours. It takes man hours. Someone has to apply this. And it takes services around that. And it also takes analysis afterwards. So as a platform, very, very easy. As a vision executed to meet complex client needs, a little less easy and certainly a little less free for the services rendered. But it describes the process, and again, you'll be able to review this on your own time as well. But just to kind of capture the spirit of, again, a lot of it is about working with the client up front, consulting with them on why their website exists, and really kind of nailing down the obvious ones and the non-obvious ones, and then nailing down, well, what about their website? How does their website function in a way to help meet those goals? And again, be aggressive in that list, and then going to just saying, well, okay, now that we know what you're going to be on, what kind of process, what kind of reports are you going to need to run to make to make those judgments? And it could be a little configuration needed, but it could also be, it could also require integrations or other tools. Once you kind of take stock of what's on the website that indicates a goal is on its way to being completed. Take stock of what GA offers to meet measurement needs. You bring up for the client that at least is presentable and understandable, and the client being client self that is going to be an analytics data, but also any webmasters or IT teams. And then you're going to help guide the QA process to some level, if not, help webmasters QA it on their own. So that's the kind of conceptual planning. Let's get to what our features actually can do and what they're not only intended for, but what they're flexible enough to achieve. Because both the beauty and one of the potential GA is that we provide a platform of tracking. We provide a few features that are very, very open and flexible and allow you to measure a wide variety of things, but we provide very little guidance on exactly what each of these features are going to do. So you have to be a little bit creative as a developer or as an analyst and kind of ride the line between analyst and developer to say, well, I could use this feature for this reason, or I could use this other feature because it would help aid analysis in this way. So, I'm going to describe a few examples of what you can do with our features, but it does take a bit of comfort with not only we are going to talk code in a sec, but also with what those tags will produce in the reports and how you're going to be doing the analysis later on. So it's this role, the kind of implementation developer, the implementation designer, is as a importance, right? Because they have to both understand how to talk shop, at least on some level, with developers, and have to know what kind of analysis is going to produce in order to meet business goals. So they have a bridge between the decision-making side of this piece and the development side of this piece. There's often a wide gulf in between. To acknowledge is again, what are they trying to achieve? What site can be to understand that achievement? We needed to measure those things on the site, and then what can be passed into GA through those tags. So we'll kind of start bottom, work our way up to the highest of this. And again, we only have a few tags, so we'll go through each of these in turn. There's the standard tracking code, there's the virtual page view tag, there's the event tag, custom variables, and social plugins. And it's pretty tracking code has a lot of flexibility. We won't actually cover that today because the depth of that is just too complex. The first thing to acknowledge is that we do have a standard tracking code, and it works across one or multiple domains or subdomains, but subdomains and multiple domains do require some customization. But at least this standard tag, this one script that goes at the header of every page on your site, goes in the head portion of every page on your site, brings in a lot, a bit, right? This is the glory of what made Google Analytics so popular, is that one tracking snippet brought in all of this, right? As opposed to having to configure pieces of code for every little bit of this data and trying to correlate, well, this data should be correlated to this. All of this comes in automatically with that single piece of code, right? These are all the dimensions or features of your visitors that we measure during one script. Are ways to edit the standard tracking code so that you can kind of manipulate what is coming through in some of these. But again, I recommend going to code.google.com with the analytics section. We'll be pointing this multiple times throughout this presentation. The analytics portion of code.google.com has a considerable amount of information about how you can work with the standard tracking code to improve that comes through. But at the very least, the default is phenomenal. And if all you did was put the standard tracking code on, at least you're getting a lot for it. But again, the modern web has more than just web pages. You can see many of these just measure something about the visitor or something about the page that they're on. And then, of course, AdWords and site search, although they don't come naturally with the tag, you have to link them. You don't have to have any extra tags for these things. Both AdWords and site search can be did fairly easily once the tags are applied. The standard tracking code, it's great. We know it, we love it. That's why we're all here. What do you do beyond this, right? So you're going to see a little link in the upper right corner. This is going to send you to code.google. And for those of you who aren't familiar, this is the even more technical version of our Help Center. So this is what you could send to a developer if they had questions on virtual page views or other features. But we're going to find these features, give some sense of what they can be used for. I want to actually put the code snippet on here because we have to acknowledge that when we make these recommendations, someone's going to have to edit this piece of code. So virtual page views, it basically forces Google Analytics to register a page view. It wouldn't naturally do so. So and you have to acknowledge that these increase your page view count. So when you put a virtual page view on something, it will act as if a new web page was called. This used to be great for before we allowed event tracking events as goals. Because if you needed something like a download to be a goal, or if you needed some outbound link to be a goal, or email link to be a goal, then you had to use a virtual page view and then name that virtual page view as a goal. You will do that, but again, it'll inflate your page view count, and maybe what you want it may not be. But you can also define an event as goals, as a goal these days. We'll cover that more in a little bit. But just to acknowledge that virtual page views are great when you have a static URL that has multiple kind of refreshes within it, often within Flash or Ajax or some dynamic or modern web code protocol. Is those kind of when you like URL and you're flipping through potential pages, those kind of page views. It's just that the way that you've built your site, they don't actually register a new URL. They don't register a new page. So virtual views, excellent for those defining those dynamic pages if they were their own page, and that way you can track a goal funnel, right? Series of steps to achieving a goal. Especially if this is like if your e-commerce shopping cart kind of billing, shipping, confirmation process, if that ends on a dynamic URL and you need to monitor how many people make it through the entire process and how many people drop off at different parts of the process, naming each one of those steps as its own virtual page view is very helpful. And you see that if this is familiar to you, the GAQ.push, this is because this is using the modern asynchronous tracking snippet. So if you're not using the most recent version of the tracking code, you may need to edit this for the old ga.js, it's kind of, or the old urchin.js, which we actually strongly recommend migrating away from. If you're still using urchin.js, go ahead and audit your own site using this process, but then the code recommended all be made with the asynchronous code. So you've got your track page view, which is basically what sends a phone call to Google Analytics. Whenever you see that track in there, either track event or track page view, sending a call to Google Analytics and saying this is the information you should be interpreting, even though you wouldn't have got it with the standard code. You could give it a name. Doesn't need to be. It can be as you like. I know one best practice I've seen out there is to set this off with /virtual or /VPV for virtual page, or something that denotes at the very start of the subdirectory string, the URI string, that this will, and be as descriptive as you need. Put it in quotes, and you'll start to see in your top content report as if it were just a standard page, including time on page and adding to your time on site. Call out kind of an anomaly, not of Google Analytics, but of all web analytics, just the way that they function. Calculate time on page is that hit a page, it sends a little phone call to GA. It says, oh, you hit this page at 11 o'clock. And then the next page, it sends another phone call. It says, oh, you hit this at 11:10. So the time on that last page was 10 minutes, 11 to 11:10. You hit another page, sends a phone call to GA. It says, oh, you hit that at 11:20. So 11 to 11:10, there's 10 minutes time on page. 11:10 to 11:20, another 10 minutes time on page. You stay on page, let's say for 20 minutes, and then you leave. And you never send a phone call to GA. Well, we subtract from to make that last calculation. So there's no time on page for the page someone saw. I mean, it's a Zen cone, but it's just someone recognized part of the product to some extent, right? If you don't send one more phone call to GA, which you can't, right? When you close the browser, there's no last phone call to us, or you close the window, there's no last phone call to us. When you don't send that last page, we don't get to calculate a time on page. So you have a bounce, which is a one-page visit. You saw one page, you sent one phone call to GA, and then you left. The second page, 0 time on site. And to recognize this, that it doesn't add or drag down your aggregates, but it does actually affect. It does drag down your averages for time on page and time on site. But without one last phone call or another phone call at some point at that last page, you don't get a sense of the true time on page that time on site that someone spent. So virtual page views help you with that process, right? Virtual page views and event tracking add to your time on page and total time on site. So you'll have the chance to get a truer sense of not only your bounce rate, because if let's say you have a single landing page with a video and a download, and with the standard tracking code, someone could be on that page for 30 minutes. They could watch your videos, they could be really interested, they could download, then they could send you a phone call, they could click the email to link. That's a fantastic visit. You would have standard tracking code, right? You would maybe want to track that download as a virtual page view, track that email to link as a virtual page view, and track that video with events. And each of those will help contribute to the total page views of that visit and the total time on site that they've spent there, and give you a clearer picture of what that visit accomplished the business goals, right? You have two different types of analyses that are produced. One says you had a bounce. The other is they achieved 3 goals, all of which the business is deemed with various levels of importance and value. And it's this kind of planning and using these advanced features that gets you there. we'll move along and we'll kind of come back to some other uses for this. Actually, I do want to call out one more, which is to rename really ugly URLs or to take out the dynamic parts of a URL. You can see, you'll actually see this track page view in. I'm actually in the last slide. Let's see if it's there. Yeah, there we go. Track page view. If you're applying the standard tracking code across pages and you've got a URL that you'd like to clean up, you can just take this little line and this and rename the page right there within the standard tracking code. It's kind of a nice way to save you a little bit of time and clean up your content reports later on. You can learn more at the Google link up in the corner. If I have a favorite tag, it would be events. This is the most flexible and one of the more compelling things you can do to your site is to kind of put events across the site within reason, right? There's a limit to the number of hits you can send Google within a session. You can send no more than 500, and I use hits in the actual term. You can actually only send 500 GIFs, only 500 server calls, Google Analytics per session. So if you go wild and they can hit over 500 events in a session, you need to dial down a little bit, bring it back to reality, and try to really plan this out in a more reasonable way that won't brush up against those limits. But event tracking, inflate page view count. Actually, you know what? I think I see what happened. This is it's in page, but it should not inflate the page view count, right? So this could be a video player, it could be a game, it could be a tab within dynamic content within a page that you just don't think is worth in a whole other page view. I mean, I'll go through a litany of other things you can use events for in a moment. It could be add to cart or remove to cart buttons. It could be any sort of element of the page that the client thinks is somehow value to the process. So if there are things to change colors on a piece of clothing, or you can see an example here if you're if you have a little car widget and you can change the color on it, or if you're on the clothing thing and you can understand what size are people choosing on average, and what using the magnification button on the product, or our for our newsletter, which doesn't actually refresh the page, it's just a little dynamic widget in the upper corner. Right, all of these things can go under the label of events. So you with events, you kind of you get to really explore the website and understand how when you talk about engagement might be pages per visit. It might be time on site. Think about it. Someone could be lost on your site, like having a horrible time, not able to find what they wanted, and they will have a really high pages per visit and a really high time on site. So engagement is more than that, right? It's when you think about when someone engages something in reality, they're toying with it, they're flipping it on, they're playing with it, and taking advantage of all of its features. So that with the web is this event tracking, right? You really kind of go through and what are all the little buttons they can push and knobs they can pull, and so with all that, once you've determined the site will need to be called an event, the step of saying what does this event need to be? Does this need to show up in the reports in a way that I can analyze it? And the action label value structure is a hierarchy, but one you can analyze without at any point. You can see just all the categories of events that were taken, all of the labels, and if you attribute a value, it can be helpful to give some weight necessary. And I can only spend so much time on this now. I want to move through the next two features and wrap with the implementation. This is again a very flexible feature that I strongly recommend testing out, but make sure that when you're giving it your category action label value, or labels, that you're thinking through what the analysis will look like, because it's common to make one of these worthless, right? Category could be either way too broad or way too specific. Action could be click, because it's a click. So action be anything else that would be a little bit more explicit about what they're doing. Often than not is either the same as the action, which doesn't provide any additional value, or it's the same as the category doesn't provide any additional value. The list is your opportunity to get as explicit as you think you might need, but it's also optional, so if you can't think of anything, don't force it. Custom variables, this one is one of our probably less features because you kind of have to think about the meta information, something that kind of describes the visit itself, but you've got variables that can be assigned to just a single page, in which case, you know, like a page category or something like that, or a site section. You could assign it to that visit. And again, I apologize for a couple of the typos in here. That's supposed to be page, visit, or visitor. You could assign visit, like maybe they were logged in that visit, or they didn't, or they watched a video that visit. Visitor, like this is a member or returning purchaser, or who has engaged socially in the past. A few caveats to the custom variable, and again, I recommend exploring this on your own. But you can see here the structure I have at the bottom. This is one of the ways I like to think about custom variables. You have what's known as 5 slots. For any given page website, you could have a custom variable that represents one of 5 potential slots. Now, if all of these were page level variables, you could set that slot over and over again, all 5 slots on every single page of your site. If you're just working with page level variables, it's very easy. You have 5 different variables for every site. The difference is that if you start assigning these to a different scope, and the potential scopes are page, visitor, visitor, page, visit, order, then slots start to get dedicated, right? So if you're in your first slot, you have something that's assigned at the visit level. That means say every time they return. Then you will want to not overwrite that slot because you'll lose, you'll lose what you're trying to track the visitor for. So if you want to know, this person signed up for member, I want to know what members do every time they return. Well, slot number 1 is now dedicated to assigning their membership status at a visitor level. So if you overwrote that with a page at some point, it would forget that it was a visitor, that it was a member, and you have to somehow reassign it, and again, not override it. Right? You don't want to override the visit slot some point throughout that visit. You want to wait until they're done with the visit, and then you might be able to use it. But again, if you know who wears something socially, is if you want to know what those visits look like and what they're comprised of, again, once you've assigned them as a sharer, once you've assigned that visit as a sharer, you don't want to write that because GA will forget that assign that slot as. So it doesn't wrap up all of your custom variables until the very end of the session. So if you think about, we've assigned this visitor to be logged in, and go along and they do a bunch of things, then they close the browser or the session. That's when we've assigned them as someone who logged in. What if you have a few ways of assigning their membership, like maybe they logged in, or maybe they logged in and then they went premium, right? So if they first logged in, their slot number 1 is assigned as a logged in visitor, but this is premium. Well, slot can get overwritten now with a visitor. Close their session, they will be known as a premium visitor. They won't be someone who first logged in and they went premium. They will just be sent the information that they were premium. Starting to make a little bit of sense, right? If you think about it as something permanent, at least until the end of that session, then it starts to make sense how at the very end you can use one or a few of your slots to this page level custom, which at the end of every page you can renew the slot and you can use it again. I won't spend too much more time on this because custom variables take a bit of just testing to work with, but at the very least, you only have the ways that these show up in reports are just category and value, and that value can be a string, like a word, or just a number that can be calculated. But the idea is that, again, you've got something that describes the nature of the visit that you'll be able to do your analysis on, and helpful analysis on later on. And here are just a few examples of some of the things that I rattled off for uses of custom variables at different levels. And I'll get a few of these in, but I do want to close up again in just a minute or two. So with it's the most common use for custom variables by far, just are they a member or are they a not member, right? Just assign that to them at the point that they set up. Yes, it's subject to cache and cookies clearing, but you always reset that every time they log in. And just knowing what are the behaviors of members versus non-members can be extremely valuable for driving more membership. If they give demographic data, or if they give you any campaign data that you find valuable, these can be great things to put in the visitor slot and monitor as they go on. With the session, you've got if you are a member, if you want to know what the difference is when a member is logged in versus not logged in, if that provides any value to them, then those are things you can apply at the second level. If they saw a key site element or clicked on a key site element, like an in-page banner that leads to a sale on your site, these can be also helpful for custom variables. Because what you're doing for people who used this site element, this banner, where their experience is more or less likely to result in a purchase of the sale item, or for people who are logged in visitors really providing any additional value, or are we just sending them through another hoop? So this kind of stuff comes from the session level. For content grouping, categories, it have product entity names that you'd like to see in your reports as opposed to just the or the top content reports. These are great places to put that in, but you are by 5, so you have to get a little bit creative. Finally, our newest tag to the family is the social plugin tracker, which helps you track those icons that allow you to share content. So if you're tweeting or sharing through Facebook or emailing or +1ing, Google +1s are actually tracked automatically. All ones require some customization, which you might need to investigate more. And again, you can learn more for that. Here is you identify the network, like Facebook or Twitter, what have you, the like a tweet or a like. And then you've got a couple of optional parts of this tag where you can say, this is what they were liking as a URI or URL, or you want to just call it that they're liking the name of this article, they're liking this product, they're liking this new campaign, right? Use the optional target for whatever is going to make sense for your analysis. And if you want to know the URL that they actually took that action on, you can put that in page path. So the default for both of those is just the URL that they're on. But if you want to be more explicit, you can edit those as well. And again, what you use all of these for is all of your site elements. You have to nail down which of those 4 tags will accomplish those measurement goals. Of comments on the common issues before we move on to the implementation guide. There are just reasons that something could go wrong, but it's more than likely something with the standard tracking code in a vast majority of cases, right? Because once the standard tracking code is working, all of the other tags either fall into place or they probably had a similar problem which you can accomplish. Very common for it to be affected by redirects, or crossing domains or subdomains without the right customization, some variables, but you're not sending a little phone call to Google, right? You're not using track page view or track event to send those phone calls. Then the custom variable may never send, or you can overwrite a slot. There are a number of common issues that you can address with some simple QA, but beyond that, it tends to be so situational that it can be a little hard to go into. And end this with just an example of an implementation plan. And I want to preface this with an example because I do encourage all these to look at their own internal processes and understand how far do they want to go in this implementation process to reaching this kind of robust implementation level, and what documents reflect the way that you work. Right. This is just a sample, and although you get to see this, you'll get a sense of how your process matches the one that I'm recommending, and you'll get to build a template that fits your own needs. So you would identify your business goals and your success indicators. I'm actually looking for my annotations. Here we are. All of your business goals. You've identified what indicates that the business is completed and what on the web page in that, or what actual web page action, and all is contributing to this. So again, it's kind of almost a hierarchical view of what happens on the website that eventually indicates that the goals are completed. If you are thinking of project plans, then let's see here. Online can having a really explicit timeline with owners can come in handy. I appreciate anybody who can stick on for the last couple minutes. Again, these can be multi-week or multi-month projects, right? This is not uncommon, and it shouldn't be it's not something to be afraid of. It's just something to acknowledge when you're getting into a large implementation with a large client. This is where you will want to explicitly list out all of the things that you need to track and start matching it to a tracking feature, and then start mapping out what that tracking feature will actually be named. So this is the depth that one could go, and you can go much farther in developing this on behalf of your client or your webmaster or IT team. To include actually building out all of the tracking codes they're going to need. So I'm not going to stick on these for too long because, again, I want to encourage you all to develop your own solutions for this. But I have tracking codes and profiles and such. You can refer to that. You have kind of a master list of what needs to be tracked and refer to all that later. Similarly, ready for account structure, you can start to build out the profiles and web property and filters and goals that you're going to need, and refer to all in kind of one holistic place. Again, what an implementation guide look like? I know I stayed on that for a very short amount of time, and you'll get more later when in the follow materials. But end this with account structure, since I did have a few things on there. You mentioned this before. Just something to keep an eye out for when you're reviewing this presentation later on. How accounts are, what they actually look like, and the relationship between web properties and profiles, and how they're reflected within your actual analytics account. Between, you can see here account. You can see your account ID. Within each, you get to see the actual setup, whether or not there's duplicate profiles within a web property, filter, goals, and all of that. Just keeping along some of the normal caveats. I mean, this is a complex, that I'm trying to convey. So unfortunately, it took the whole hour, and I wasn't able to get through just about everything. For the YouTube audience, since you can always pause it later, I'll just flip through some of these, and you can always pause it and review at your own time. But at the end, I have about 30 minutes here that I can spend with you, our beloved participants of this webinar. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this for YouTube. So thanks everyone for joining. Feel free to drop off, and if you have any questions, I will be taking them after the webinar.